Now for analysis, we turn to Arise News contributor Akhtar Khan. Hi, Akhtar. Welcome to Arise America.
Thank you very much, Debbie.
Glad to have. We have a lot to talk about. I want to jump right in. Of course, we just heard Carl Bostic reporting on the atmosphere, what's happening there in the conflict between the Hamas and Israel. And we now know that Egypt has proposed a ceasefire. So my question for you is kind of dive in, first of all, is that what needs to happen and who needs to be involved for a ceasefire to be at least a reasonable possibility?
Well, you know, this has been going for so many decades. It's a case of knocking both heads together. Neither side will stop. As we've heard Netanyahu said, well, if they stop firing rockets, we'll stop firing rockets. So someone has got to stop someone on the line. And hopefully this new deal that's been brokered by Egypt, it will go to cabinet first with Netanyahu and, of course, with Mohammed Abbas as well. Once they've agreed those terms, then they'll come back and have a ceasefire. So we may still see rockets firing back and forth between the two until the two cabinets meet. There might be a moratorium to say, whilst the cabinets are meeting, let's stop with the ceasefire, as it were, or implement the ceasefire.
Yeah, and we can't forget, and Egypt has successfully negotiated a ceasefire before, but it doesn't last. So, of course, that's the question, is even if they can get to an agreement, will they stick to the agreement? Let's turn and talk about some other things. Did you have something you wanted to say about that?
I was going to say that's been the fundamental problem. In 2008, they had a 6-month, ceasefire. That didn't last. And there's skepticism on both sides. And, of course, as we've heard from Tel Aviv, it's Ramadan. So, emotions and tensions are high.
Indeed, indeed. All right, we're going to move on. Just because there's so many other things to talk about. As we know, there have been nuclear talks going on with Iran. They were meeting in Geneva. I believe the talks are over right now. Give us a summary of what came out of this most recent meeting.
Well, in a nutshell, the sanctions imposed on Iran were supposed to bring Iran to the talking table. They've now done that. So they're now all met in Geneva. So the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, which of course isn't a permanent member, have now all met in Geneva. So the bottom line is that Iran has got to stop making uranium enrichment and has to stop making centrifuges, has to dismantle the plants that it's already created, and has to, if you like, dilute those enrichments that they've already enriched. So basically, they've drawn them right back to the starting block. Now, many people have said in the region, this isn't Iran giving anything away, because they can still make uranium, enrich uranium, although under UN conditions, although under those conditions imposed. Now, they have 6 months in which to finalise a proper agreement. So between now and then, they need to go back to the table, back and forth, and do some hardcore talky sort of negotiations, I guess.
Yeah, and of course, if they don't meet that 6-month deadline, then there'll be harsh sanctions.
Exactly. But at the moment, the quid pro quo is if Iran do meet those proposals, then they get $4.2 billion back in entrenchments, and of course, sanctions will be lifted as well, very slowly. But it all depends on if Iran behaves from now on in.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. But it does seem like they're anxious, though, for the loosening of those sanctions.
They are, but interestingly enough, governments like Saudi Arabia and, of course, Israel, are not very keen on Iran to have those sanctions lifted, because if Iran does pull away and actually has those sanctions removed, then the eyeball, particularly from America, will be removed from the Middle East to elsewhere. And, of course, that doesn't, play into the hands of Israel.
Right, and talk more about that, about what these broader implications are then.
Well, it's also the Arab governments are very fragile, because they have both the moderate and extremist sections in society, and they have to appease both. And of course, the traditional backers of those extremists tend to be the Iranians. Hezbollah is an example. So they have to appease that section or that faction. Now, if Iran is allowed to, if you get away with those sanctions, if you like, then it allows them to get into a better position where they can supply more guns, ammunition, or finance to those extremist groups. And that's the big concern of a lot of those countries, like the Gulf countries and Abu Dhabi and Kuwait and Oman, etc.
Let me turn back to Iran. Do you think they're sufficiently motivated enough to abide by these guidelines?
I think, according to what we've seen so far coming out of Geneva, I would say yes. But there's still a huge degree of skepticism. We've seen the Iranian president at the United Nations. We've seen President Obama talk about what America needs to do in terms of reeling Iran in. We've seen Benjamin Netanyahu saying that this is all complete farce. You can't possibly believe what Iran has to say, and it just doesn't make sense. Iran is out to eliminate Israel off the face of the map. So, I guess we've got to wait and see the next couple of months to see how Iran behaves.
Yeah, time always does in tactile. Let's turn the corner again, talk about Iraq. Of course, there is this raging onslaught insurgency going on with the ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. But while everyone has been focusing their attention on the marching forward of ISIS, almost without anybody noticing, the Kurds
Yes.
have seized an opportunity.
Interesting enough, it was the Kurds, which obviously who wanted an independent state in northern Iraq. They have been slowly, if you like, creating certain sections of northern Iraq for themselves. And they've occupied certain cities in Iraq that have been left from Iraqi occupations, those troops fighting ISIS, if you like. And now they've annexed another part of northern Iraq. And, of course, they've recently occupied 2 oil fields as well. And, of course, you know, they're going to call referendums in those 2 areas that they've occupied as well, and they've seized other parts of northern western Iraq, and they'll call referendums if they want to belong to a Kurdish state. And that doesn't bode well with the central government for obvious reasons. And on the flip side, you have ISIS carving up the other section of the northern part of Iraq. So, you know, it's a land grab at the moment in Iraq, and it seems to be an almighty mess. Do we go back in there? That's the big question.
Well, that is indeed the big question. And we don't have time to get to Afghanistan, which probably teaches, we have to, certainly, we being the United States, learn some lessons for what's happening now in Iraq to what potentially could happen in Afghanistan. But what is the end game, though, very briefly with Iraq?
You know, we didn't have a master plan going into Iraq. I don't think we have a master plan now that we've come out of Iraq. The idea was, as Obama said, and I'm going to quote him, U.S. has left a sovereign and stable and self-reliant Iraq. Doesn't seem that way to me. And I think what we need to do is we need to go back and to ensure that Iraq is capable of relying and being able to do what it needs to do in order to sustain as a sovereign nation. And same thing with Afghanistan. And that's the big question for us is, can we leave these countries to fend for themselves? Do we need a permanent American base and presence in those strategic locations? The US already has 32 bases right across the Gulf, but Afghanistan is very strategic. So as far as Iraq is concerned, I think we need to watch it very carefully.
Yeah, we do indeed, and I would venture to guess that President Obama certainly will exit Afghanistan, if at all very differently than the United States exited Iraq. Very briefly, just a couple of seconds. Of course, you know, there has been this standoff between Abdullah and Ashraf Ghani in the presidential election in Afghanistan. The 2 sides have agreed to an audit here. What, though, are the complexities that will muck up, if you will, this process?
It will come down to tribal divisions, effectively. Which tribes side with the Loya Jirga, if you like, which is made up of the different tribes in Afghanistan, who will side with who. And, you know, both have said to Kerry, the Secretary of State, that they will abide by the final result, which is out any time now. But any new president coming in will have to deal with the terrorism issue, security issue, Taliban coming back again, corruption, and obviously the drug war as well. So there's still lots on the table to play with for any new president. Yeah,
and don't forget the United States is still waiting on whoever that is to sign the security agreement with the United States. A lot to talk about. So nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, W.
We will see you again.
Absolutely.
Akhtar Khan, thank you.